Howdy, folks. Jeff here with My Father's Shop podcast, and we're so thrilled to have Alan Kohler on here from Odyssey Batteries. He's the senior marketing manager, and today we want to talk about AGM2 technology and charging considerations across vehicle battery chemistries. Now, that's a mouthful, and a lot of folks don't really understand about AGM, do they, Alan?
Nope, nope. And I think to really explain what we call AGM2, you kind of have to, go back a little bit and explain the other ones. So if we can very briefly just talk about, technology in general and batteries. As we know, the type of batteries that, cars have been using for geez, what, 60, 70 years plus, have always been what we consider flooded lead acid batteries. Back in the day, you actually had caps where you'd screw off and you'd have to add distilled water to. That kind of went away, I want to say, in like the 80s, where AC Delco made what they called the maintenance-free battery, which really only mean that it was sealed so that you couldn't add fluid, which didn't mean it wasn't gonna dry out. It just means you couldn't add fluid. So maintenance free, hands off, right? And then around the same time, I'll say, in the 80s, maybe earlier 90s, more so, you saw the introduction of an AGM battery into the automotive world. Typically, it was used and still is used for um, higher end cars, number one. Anywhere you would be in the trunk or under the seat. There's a lot of cars that have them under the seat. It's a non-spillable design, so you don't have that acid, you don't have the venting, um, um, and it's just a safer battery, I guess I'll say. The other thing that goes along with AGM is to make an AGM battery, they're packed very tightly, the cells. So your plates don't move around internally. The failure mode a lot of times on a flooded battery was it's just floating in acid, right? So all of the material in the plates would literally at one point break off, fall to the bottom, short your cell. That's how a battery would fail. AGM batteries don't have that problem. So they're packed tight and pretty much clean inside. And then what we did, and again, Odyssey's been around since 1996, and someone had the great idea of, hey, what if we use this technology, which we called at the time and still do, thin plate pure lead. So what that means is two things. Number one, it's made out of pure lead, which is different than what 99% of the people do these days. That's completely recycled lead. And the difference there is there's no impurities in the lead. Therefore, there's nothing to corrode, to have a chemical reaction. A flooded lead acid battery and even a regular AGM battery that's not pure lead, they basically start discharging the day it's built, right? So you'll see a lot of times that type of battery will have, say, a 6 month shelf life. That's why, because it's already with those alloys that are in the lead starting to discharge. So with the pure lead, you don't have that. And then the thin plate part of that scenario is just instead of casting our plates, which makes it that you can have, there's only so small you could go with a cast plate, right? Ours are like, we'll call them rolled and stamped. It's like a feed of lead, and we can make them much thinner. So if you can make it much thinner, you can put more in the cell, and then you have more power, more capacity, more cranking amps. So that's really what AGM2 is that second level of a regular AGM battery where we just put in the pure lead and we make them thin plate. So that's fairly unique to the automotive world these days. Again, even though we've been around since 1996.
Okay, let's go back just a little and help the consumer, the customer, understand that now there's actually um, five or six different types of batteries for the technology that are in the vehicle. And the original one had they still all have the lead plates. They had the lead plates, and where you say the floating, the acid was just basically we poured a mixture in there. That's what created the electrolytes, which created the power, and it goes by about 2 volts per system
So,
there,
yep.
and per cell. And so you had six of them, two times six. That's how we came up with the 12 volts because originally they started with 6 volts, and then they went to 12, which was a little bit bigger battery. And like you said, they had problems with sulfiding and the gases, so they would either the gases would evaporate out, or else the sulfide would flake off. And when it would reach the bottom and it comes up and it touches those the lead, it shorts the battery out. Now we came up with another kind, AGM. Now explain what AGM, glass mat. Explain that just a little.
AGM actually stands for absorbed glass mat, and basically what that does, which is different than just the plates, kind of like, well, I mean, plates in flooded lead acid batteries still had separators between the plates because that's between your positive and negative that would alternate. The AGMs actually have more of like a, call it an envelope shape, a U shape, so it goes down and around the plate to protect it on the bottom, number one. And then the acid isn't just free floating in there, it's absorbed into that separator material.
Right,
I always kind of
kind of like a sponge.
I always liken it to um like cotton gauze kind of material. So it was, but if you overfill that and you squeeze it, there's still fluid in there. A lot of people think that, oh, well, this is in fact, we used to call it incorrectly in my mind, a dry cell battery. It's not really dry. There's still acid in there. It's just not going to come out. So that was more of a shipping regulation thing when they started calling these batteries dry batteries. It's because it's not a hazardous material to ship. It's safer. So.
And so now we've got this new technology that they're using, AGM. And so when we talk about charging considerations, and when you say, hey, we can pack a little bit more power in it, a little bit more cold cranking amps, because the alternators actually changed several years ago to kind of like on demand. So, like sometimes you'll be going down the highway and it'll say 14.1 volts, and it's charging. And then all of a sudden, it goes down and you're like, oh my gosh, what happened? Did my bell break or whatever? It's because of the pulley that was on the front of that. It would disengage and say, hey, we're not in charge. We're pulling from the battery. Whereas we're always used to the battery starts the car, the alternator provides all of the power. But now it's kind of changed just a little. Explain a little bit of that.
And it's just funny you say that because I had the same reaction when I got my 2016 Chevy Silverado and I'm driving down the road and I saw the voltmeter change. I'm like, oh no, what happened? And that was several years ago, but now we all know that that's done on purpose. Which again, I don't know how all that works in the background. I'm not an expert on electrical systems in vehicles, but it knows that the battery's charged. It knows that it doesn't need to use that power from the alternator specifically to charge the battery the entire time the car's running, right? So yeah, I mean that's a benefit these days. I think they have that built smartly enough that nobody's killing batteries because they have a kind of a system. Alternatively, when cars were older, their charging systems weren't that great, right? So trying to keep a battery healthy with a charging system that was maybe a little iffy became more of a challenge. So we don't have that challenge as much anymore.
So the electrical systems and the batteries are not your grandpa's battery anymore. This is all new
Right.
technology, and that's a lot of what we try to educate the consumer about. Now these batteries cost more.
Yeah, I mean, lead in general has gone up over the last, geez, I don't even know how long. I mean, it seems like decade plus for sure. But the other thing that you talk about technology. The other thing, one thing I didn't mention so far was what we call an enhanced flooded battery. So enhanced flooded batteries are made slightly different as well. And the idea there is to have more of a deep cycle battery. And the reason why we do that is, and we don't do that, other companies do. AGM's still one step above, and they call them EFBs, enhanced flooded batteries, because start-stop vehicles, which have been around for a while, is the other thing that kills batteries, right? If your car stops at a stoplight and you got your air conditioner running, whatever, your radio running, and now your engine turns off, now everything's running off the battery. And then on top of that, you start the car and you put a load on that every time you pull out. So that really beats up batteries. So they learned real quick that we got to make something a little bit better than your standard flooded battery just to take care of that. And then the AGM, especially the pure lead AGM, the biggest benefit of the Odyssey being a pure lead is it already a deep cycle battery, right? So it does not get beat up by that constant. I mean, it kind of likes that. I mean, that's what it's designed for, right? So that's where we really shine, in applications like that. So wanted to point that out as a very important new technology type of thing. That
Well, and that is a huge deal because the marine guys, the guys that go fishing, they all know what a deep cycle battery is because
Sure.
they've been using those for years and years. But it's like they had to buy a special deep cycle, and that ran the trolling motor the whole time while they're out there on the lake. They come back in and they will actually discharge all the way down the same amount from the top to the bottom until it's the power is gone. Whereas a regular battery will just start the car and it just pull the power down. It's not used to doing a full cycle all the way down. And as you went down, the battery actually got weaker and weaker, and a deep cycle won't do that, and it'll allow so many complete recharges, which is part of the new technology that folks don't understand. It's like, oh my gosh, hey, we're actually using like a deep cycle battery in your vehicle now, and you're not even used to that unless you're a boat guy. All of that changes on the parameters of the charging considerations, and we were talking a little bit off camera about that as far as where the new technology has that built in. So if they have an older car or if they have a car that doesn't have an AGM and they think, oh my gosh, hey, the AGM has more power. Hey, the AGM will work better on my vehicle. Is that entirely true that they can just switch them out indiscriminately or not? Um, caring as much about the climate because sometimes the heat affects the AGM battery. And like down here in Texas, whereas, up north, they have more cold.
Yeah. Well, heat and cold affects all types of batteries. AGM, at least thin plate pure lead AGM, can handle it better. You mentioned the charging systems on cars. Um, you know, I'm going to use an example that I had because I'm a car guy. So I had a 1984 Corvette. I upgraded to an AGM battery. The alternator is only putting about 13.8 volts out maximum. As we know, most cars for the last couple decades run in 14.2, 14.2, 14.4, which is completely acceptable for an AGM, including Odyssey. So that's kind of what we tell people. As long as your car is running somewhere around 14.2 to a maximum of about 14.8, that's the range you want to be in, right? And most cars these days can do that. Example of an older car, you're upgrading, and a lot of times those cars, people don't use them a lot, they're collectors' cars, whatever else. We just tell people more so keep an eye on it, right? So that's why everybody has a bench charger, right? It's sitting for a while. Charger or the alternator's not maybe getting it to 100% all the time. We're going to throw it on a charger when we have the opportunity, just to keep the life, span longer on that battery. That's maybe not in the best environment. But yeah, like I said, most cars these days can handle AGM no problem. That's obviously done on purpose. Only exception that I know of to kind of that rule of the whole 14.2 was we get a lot of calls from people with Toyotas that say, hey, my charging system's designed and it only goes up to 13.8. And we're like, well, yeah, that's not great. And somebody somewhere along came up with the idea of some kind of a diode they put in the fuse box that raises the voltage. And we're like, great, whoever designed that, knows what they're doing. So, we actually recommend that to people like, hey, yeah, if you have the ability to do that, absolutely, because that's going to help the life of your battery, right? Can you get away with not doing it? Will it start? Yes. Will it last you more than 2 or 3 years? Maybe not, right? So if you really want to get some life out of that, you got to take care of it the right way. And it's got to be the alternator's got to be where it should be. Charging it, supplementing the charge if need be is always a good idea. Especially again if you have an occasional use vehicle, because when you're sitting, it doesn't matter what kind of technology it is, pure lead AGM2 still gets discharged by things that are running in the background on your vehicle. Like again, we know how much electronics are on cars these days, computers and alarm systems and locks on radios and stuff like that that are constantly draining on a vehicle. If your car is sitting for several months, especially in the summer, it's going to be dead no matter what kind of battery it is. So you got to make sure that you're aware of that and you maintain that. And that's why, charger manufacturers make chargers for people with classic cars because you're going to plug it in your garage when it's sitting there in the winter. So
And see, you're talking about a couple of different things, like on bench chargers, and you're saying maintaining. So, folks need to know that there is one that's called a maintainer, and it's kind of like a trickle charger. And then shops normally use it's like we can't use the grandpa's old charger anymore. We have to have the new technology, which has a specific button that says AGM, because when you're charging them, it is a different rate, or the smart chargers now will do that.
yeah, I mean, and that's been a number of years now too. And I think part of the regulations for charger manufacturing said that, we don't want the charger that when you tap the positives and the negatives together, it makes a spark because that's just dangerous, right? Especially if you're charging a battery and you're gassing a battery. I'm sure there's lots of stories of people blowing up batteries because of, hitting something metal with the charger or whatever else. So that was done on purpose to help people from blowing themselves up, I guess. But so smart chargers, when they were designed, they have a specific set algorithm that says, okay, I'm going to go up to this voltage, I'm going to hold it for this long, I'm going to turn it off, and either float it at a certain voltage to just keep it above the 12 point whatever that it needs to be at, or in some cases turn it off and then wait, and then it looks for it to go down and it'll turn back on. So again, smart chargers have gotten, well, and again, it's not new. They've gotten good. But I still have a 100 amp roll charger in my garage. I mean, if I have a big battery that needs a good charge, I can put it on there, just by all the safety rules, right? Um, so,
Well,
so
and that's what happens in shops and stuff. It's like, oh, that charger still works. I don't need the new
right,
one. But there is a difference in the
there is.
technology in these new
Mhm.
batteries. So, answer a question on here, because we're talking AGM2, and you're saying because this is the new thin design, pure lead, not recycled lead. So, how do we know if we're getting one of those batteries, or if we go up to the parts store, or we go to the shop and say, "Hey, we call them and we test their battery and say, hey, you need a new battery," and the customer says, "Hey, I've heard about this new AGM2." How do we know if we're getting one of those batteries?
I mean, quite honestly, I mean, we are, I think, the only ones that do that. Because we're a global company, and I can't think of anybody else that actually uses truly pure lead. But the good news is, voltage wise, for charging, it's not any different, right? We just got done talking about alternators and where the range they need to be in. Chargers, we tell people that, and we get the question all the time. Okay, how do I charge my Odyssey battery? And we say, as long as you have a charger that specifically says for its AGM, then it's the same as AGM2 as far as the voltage goes, right? So we're not saying that it's a different animal in its usage and its charging, but we are saying that AGM2 is deep cycle. We're saying it's going to be typically more powerful and it's going to last longer, right? So that's the differentiating factor. So you can walk in an auto parts store right now and say, I want an AGM battery, and you're still going to have two choices, right? You're going to have a standard AGM battery, which again have also been around for a while, and most everybody makes them. And then hopefully you have the ability to upgrade to an AGM2. And again, the reason why we did that was just to really communicate to customers that it is a different animal in construction, right? Maybe not so much in function while you're driving down the road, but definitely, it's different. And that's why it's more expensive.
New and improved. Now, Odyssey batteries been around since in 1996, and you said these are still made in the United States, up in Missouri, and
Yeah.
so is. Odyssey the only battery right now that has the AGM2 with the thin plates?
Far as I'm aware of, yeah. The funny thing is, there was another company. Long story short, it was called North Star Battery, and it was also in Missouri, and it was also in Missouri because it was formed by people that used to work for Odyssey. So fast forward to, I believe it was, geez, now it's been 4 or 5 years. We actually bought North Star for ourselves, right? So now we used to say we have one plant in Missouri. It was in Warrensburg, Missouri. We bought North Star Battery a few years back. They had two plants that did thin plate pure lead. So now we're all under the same umbrella. It's all Odyssey, but now we have three plants in Missouri, and that just enabled us to increase our production and get more business. And the technology is the same, so we didn't really have to change much.
Yeah. One side question. Does Odyssey private label, or are the only ones we're going to find is Odyssey?
We don't do a lot of private labeling. Historically, back in the day, we were the ones who made the um, Die Hard, I guess it was the Platinum that was sold at Sears.
Yeah, yeah.
I believe it was an all gray battery, if I remember correctly. Now, I've been here 10 years, and I think right around when I started, they started phasing that out. We make a specific line for interstate batteries. It's called their MTZ line. So that is their high-end AGM. Trying to think what else. I know AC Delco has a high-end AGM line as well. It's not a lot of SKUs, but we do sell a few items to AC Delco that are private labeled. And then there might be one or two in the trucking world. I mean, we're huge in the trucking world. And off the top of my head, is a brand called Fleet Right, and it says Fleet Right, and then made by Odyssey. So some cases we hide it a little bit, some cases we don't. The other place that I forgot about was Batteries Plus stores sell a brand called X2 Power. They're gray with a blue top, and those have historically always been made by us slash North Star. So a lot of times I'll send people, if they can't find an Odyssey somewhere for whatever reason, I say, here's some private label opportunities that maybe you can find our battery, but somebody else is selling. So helps us out in the long run.
So that is
Point,
interesting
yeah.
to know because, like you go into and folks will go all to all kinds of different stores, trying to get the particular type of battery, and whereas shops, we just use certain suppliers, and so that's why I was wondering, what the different options is, but
And outside of Odyssey, I mean, there's only so many battery manufacturers in the
yeah.
country. If you go to an auto parts store, a Walmart, whatever else, you're getting one of two or three manufacturers, and that's the way it's always been, and that's fine. But um, again, they're just different labels, basically, in those cases.
And that's why I was curious with Odyssey on how they were. And so we appreciate so much you taking time and explaining part of the new technology that's in batteries and that's been in the vehicles now. Anything else that you want to share for the shops or for the consumers as far as this new technology is concerned?
Hmm. I mean, I think we covered most of it, just knowing how these batteries are used these days and how things have changed in vehicles. Talked a little bit about chargers. The only other thing that I think that I would add that might help the consumer and the shop is, one of the ways, when batteries fail, people say, "Oh, it won't take a charge anymore," and I'm the kind of guy who, well, I'm going to make it take a charge, right? I'm going to charge it 10 times until I figure out how, if it's really, really something wrong with it, right? Because most times I think, I can still bring it back, right? And there's some truth to that, right? So if you maybe aren't using the correct size charger, the correct type charger, you could be doing yourself a disservice in the fact that you're giving up basically and saying, oh well, I tried what I normally try and that didn't work, so I'm not going to try anymore, right? But if you really look at and talk to the manufacturer of these batteries and say, well, what should we be using? Talked about 100 amp roll chargers. It's just like still not out of the question. But I think the biggest thing that we see from especially for when cars sit a lot, where people will run into a situation where they just can't get that battery to charge up correctly, is they'll use too small of a charger, right? So we actually at Odyssey, we actually have a minimum amperage rating for every battery that you're supposed to use in charging a battery, right? Maintaining's, like you said, that's a little bit different. That assumes you're fully charged and you're just keeping it there. But charging, in the case again of Odyssey, is we tell people it's got to be at least 10% of the amp hour rating, right? So if you got a 50 amp hour battery, you got to use at least 5 amps to charge it. And, as we know, some of the manufacturers of chargers slash maintainers, smart chargers over the years, some of those were only like 1 amp or 2 amp. So that's really not enough. So that's why you're not getting it up to 100% where it should be. So we should really try to push that these days is, okay, what battery you got? Oh, you need at least this, right? And I said minimum, right? So the optimum on that, again, this is for pure lead because pure lead doesn't have the internal resistance. It doesn't heat up when you charge it. So you're able to go with a slightly higher charge rating than maybe you could with a beat up old, flooded battery, and now you're going to boil it over. So the optimum is 40% of the amp hour rating, and believe it or not, you can go up to 100% of the amp hour rating. So again, that 50 amp battery, you can charge that with a 50 amp charger, and there's no worries. It's not going to heat up. It's not going to boil over. It's not going to destroy it. So again, the AGM2 just has that ability. It accepts charge better, faster, so it's more efficient. So, especially with these deep cycle applications, you can get them back up to 100% much quicker because it's safe to charge them with, the proper higher voltage. Where, I think a lot of times you talk about trickle chargers, people were always like, oh, well, I was always told, I can only put a small trickle into it for a long period of time. That's not necessarily true anymore. Just like it's not true anymore that you shouldn't, store your battery on the concrete. So things change over the years, and for good reason. So you got to really, I guess, educate the consumer, educate yourself, just to know, where you should be on the current technology and how to take care of it.
And so when you're talking about all that, there's a couple of the new technologies that when you're talking about chargers, also the testers, the shops need to have the testers that can actually go to an AGM test cycle and not just a regular flooded cycle, because you got the AGMs, you got the flooded, you got the gel batteries, you got the EFBs that you're talking about, and all of those have to be tested separately. And then with the old chargers versus the new chargers, the new smart chargers, if the battery's been sitting there for a while and on the car that sits in the garage and it hooks onto it and it says, oh, this battery is dead, where you're below the threshold of the 10%, if it's 3 volts or 2 volts, and it'll say, oh, this battery won't take a charge. The new charging systems actually have a dead battery override where it will put a charge on there in order for the system to say, oh, okay, now we can try to make this battery work again. And that's part
Did
of
not
the
know that. That's interesting.
yeah, that's part of the new technology that's out there, because some of the smart chargers actually say recycler, I mean, reconditioner on there. When you're talking about, oh, I'm going to take my 100, I'm going to get this thing to take a charge. These new ones will actually put a little bit of a service charge on there. And it's funny because, when the old ones, when we would do a charge on them, we would have to turn the lights on or whatever in order to burn that little bit of surface charge out before we tested them. And, you had the old ways of testing them, and now they got all these new ways. And so that's what, the shops are keeping up with that technology. And we're hoping that a lot of the consumers will listen to this and understand with this new technology, you're going to get a little sticker shock on the price of these batteries. And it's not always because of inflation. It's because the technology has changed. It's not your grandpa's battery anymore. And now we're going to AGM2. And so it's like, okay, now we're not using the recycled lead, we're using the new fresh lead. And so we're be able to make it a little bit thinner. We're trying to cut out some of the impurities, making it where it's going to last just a little bit longer.
Right.
Get a little bit more for your buck. It's kind of the what
Exactly.
you're trying to do, and so that's where the we want the consumer to understand the shops are doing the best that we can. We want the customer to know we're as a shops we're doing the best we can to keep up with the latest technology and help explain it so the customer understands why the prices are increasing. It's because of new the new technology that's in the batteries, that's in the charging system, that's in the equipment that we have to have in the shop to properly service these items.
Testers is a good point. We don't often talk about that, but that is a very good point in the fact that, again, years ago, the only thing you had was what you considered a carbon pile tester, which actually heated up the battery and took something out of the battery. Clearly, you had to be charged ahead of time to do that test. These days, with digital testers, they say you don't need to be charged, but I'll sit here and tell you that you're going to get the best result clearly if it's charged, right? I mean, if you didn't charge it, it's going to tell you, hey, this is low, right? So we always tell people charge it first. If you're using a digital tester, all the auto parts stores have them. If you have a problem with your battery, you go in, you say, "Hey, Mr. Counter Guy, please test my battery." They put it on the right setting and they dial in what the CCA is supposed to be, and it says you're low on charge, you're bad, right? When it's bad, it's typically bad, right? I mean, you don't get a false positive on a bad typically if it's charged. But a lot of times I think people, maybe they don't know that they have a bad alternator or something like that. So you would immediately blame it on the battery because your car doesn't start, right? But that's not always the case either. So you got to start somewhere. Battery's usually the easiest thing. So charge it up, test it, then you take that out of the equation, right? So there's better ways these days. Like I said, you just don't want to, start throwing parts at a car when you go to fix it, right? So you had to have some basis for testing prior to making a determination.
When we talk about the new technology, and you had already said you don't understand the electrical systems as much as you're understanding the batteries, is it a good idea to jump one vehicle to another with the AGMs or with any?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and this is actually things have come up. I haven't heard it a lot lately, but I've been doing this for 32 years, and it is a subject that comes up. I don't think there's any issue. I mean, again, a lead acid battery is still a lead acid battery, whether it's AGM or not. The places where you get in trouble with jump starting anything is when people hook up things backwards, maybe you do have a battery that's a brick, and you're trying to jumpstart a car that hasn't been running 2 years. Yeah, that's kind of dangerous because you don't know how that battery is going to react. Um, what we used to tell people, um, as an example, when I worked in the power sports world, is people would say, "Can I jumpstart my motorcycle with a car?" And we used to tell people, just as long as you didn't have the car running, now you're just pulling off the battery power. You're just supplementing, you're starting with the battery power. Then you don't have to worry about that, the alternator back feeding into the other vehicle and all that fun stuff. So, yeah, again, I think there's still obviously good ways to jumpstart a car safely. But now we also have jumpstart packs too, right? So then you take that out of the equation even more. Jumpstart packs are a good idea. We don't make them, but it's especially if you're somebody that's we see that a lot in people do like the overlanding, right? So they use their batteries for all kinds of stuff. They're running refrigerators on it while they're camping. Well, you run the risk of bringing that battery down just past the point where you can't start anymore. So if you don't have one of those jump start packs and you don't got a guy in a set of jumper cables around, you're in trouble. So that I think that brought up the market of jump start packs in the last
Yeah. Well,
10,
and
10
that's
years or more.
what we because we see a lot of alternators that are full field. We see a lot of fuses that'll pop, whether they hooked it wrong or whatever. They're going right to a dead battery, and all of a sudden, the good battery on the car goes, "What?" and all of a sudden we cause problems. And it's like, if that's your best friend and you want to, cost yourself a couple $100, okay. Otherwise, we don't recommend, and we'd say,
Yeah.
get it towed in and get it charged properly, or get a jump pack, and there's different technology in these new jump packs, that'll show you, hey, how much volts you have in it, and once you start it, is the car charging? Because if you jump it and the alternator's not charging, and that's why the battery went down, then it's like
Ain't gonna get too far. Yeah.
it got to get towed anyways. So
Right. Right.
I was curious as your thoughts on that. So yeah, that kind of
Still do it. I still do it. But again, you have to have special considerations more so these days than in the past doing a lot of things. So
well, Alan, we appreciate so much you taking time and sharing this. And if the folks want to reach out, what's the website for Odyssey Batteries? Because the company is actually entered.
this is the parent company, yes. Odyssey is technically just the brand of our high-end automotive batteries. We have a lot of brands. We have a lot of manufacturings all over the world. But yeah, this Odyssey battery can be found at odysseybattery.com. We have a dealer locator on there where it tell you where to be able to buy Odyssey batteries, including lots of places online. And then the other thing we have on there is a battery lookup. So if you don't know what fits your vehicle, you put in your year, make, model, engine, and it'll tell you. You can click on it and you can buy it right there. So it's a very interactive website. So definitely recommend checking it out if you're interested in upgrading to an Odyssey battery.
And when you say about the telling you which battery, it's because a lot of times there's different options, and folks just say, "Oh, hey, I got a Ford Explorer, give me the battery for it." It don't work that way anymore. There's actually
Yeah, that
options.
became more complicated over years too. I mean, the best example I have of that is some European cars could have three or four different possible batteries in that model, that engine, that year. And in that case, I don't even know what to tell people. I'm like, you literally have to measure it at that point because the only difference, these they call them DIN size batteries, is European design that kind of try to consolidate things, right? Then the difference is length, right? So one battery might be this big, the other one's an inch or an inch and a half longer, another one's inch and a half longer than that. So I literally tell people to go out with a tape measure. You got the 12-inch battery. This is the exact one you need. So there's really, the only way to, obviously besides reading it off the label, we call things like group 48s, group 49s. In Europe, they call it, an H6 or an H8. Everybody makes them. So it just takes maybe a little more digging into it to figure out which one you have in your specific car. But same deal. It's doable. You figure out.
And the manufacturers have kind of started, and I don't want to say hiding the batteries, but we know when Chrysler was putting them up inside the fender wheel, and now we have some Ford products where you actually have to remove the windshield wipers. Motor assembly in order and part of the cowling to get it. You mentioned that some of them are underneath the seats, and normally it's like the rear seat, right behind the drivers, in the floorboard there. And then so many of them now are back in the trunk. And so it's like, oh my gosh, when you're talking about jump starting them, is you don't even know where the battery is. It's like, okay, and those reasons are why you need to know exactly which battery fits your vehicle, because those compartments are made for certain size vehicles. And Odyssey will show you that if you go on their website, odysseybatteries.com. We appreciate it so much. And thanks again to everybody watching and listening.